If you play this piano, I'll marry you. Mocked the rich girl, but the cleaner played like a. Hit like and subscribe so we can keep creating the stories you love. The crystal chandelier shattered the silence before it hit the marble floor. Well, not literally, but it might as well have, because what happened next in the Harrington ballroom that Tuesday evening would shatter everything else. Lives, hearts, carefully constructed lies that the wealthy tell themselves to sleep at night. If you play this piano, I'll marry you. The words sliced through the air like a blade dipped in honey and venom. Lila Harrington's voice carried across the cavernous ballroom, each syllable dripping with the kind of cruel amusement that only comes from a lifetime of never hearing the word no. She stood there in her silk dress, midnight blue, cost more than most people's cars, pearls catching the light like tiny accusations around her throat. 23 years old and beautiful in that sharp, untouchable way that money polishes to perfection. Her friends clustered around her like pretty little satellites, giggling behind manicured hands. But their laughter died when they saw who she was talking to. Noah Mitchell froze, dust cloth halfway to the piano bench. 6'2" of lean muscle wrapped in a janitor's uniform that had seen better days, probably better years. His dark hair was slightly mussed from 8 hours of cleaning the Harrington estate, and there was a tiredness in his brown eyes that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He straightened slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Most of the help scattered like startled birds when Lila Harrington turned her attention their way. But Noah? Noah just stood there, steady as stone. "Excuse me." His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of voice that suggested depths beneath still waters. Lila's smile widened, predatory and gleaming. "You heard me, janitor boy. You think you can just touch it?" She gestured toward the Steinway grand piano, a beast of ebony and ivory that dominated the center of the ballroom like a sleeping dragon. "That piano is worth more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes." "I'm cleaning it," Noah said simply. "It's my job." "Your job," she repeated, savoring the words. "Right. Well, here's the thing." She sauntered closer, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to something terrible. "I don't like people touching my things, especially people who don't belong." The air in the room shifted. Even her friends sensed it, the way predators recognize when the hunt begins. But there was something else, something none of them could name. A tension that had nothing to do with class and everything to do with the way Noah's eyes never left Lila's face, the way her breath caught just slightly when he took a single step toward her instead of backing away. "But," Lila continued, her voice rising to carry across the ballroom where other servants had stopped to watch, "if you're so interested in my piano, if you think you're worthy to touch it." She paused, letting the silence stretch like a rubber band about to snap. "Then prove it. Play something. Anything. And if you can actually play, really play, not just bang on the keys like a child, then I'll marry you right here, right now." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens right before lightning strikes, when the whole world holds its breath. Noah's hand tightened on the dust cloth. Something flickered across his face. Pain, memory, a ghost of something long buried. "You don't want to make promises you can't keep, Miss Harrington." Lila's eyebrows shot up. No one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to her like that. Like she was the one who needed to be careful. "Is that a threat, janitor boy?" "It's advice." The way he said it, calm, certain, with just the faintest edge of something dangerous, made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the fact that she'd never met a man who didn't immediately try to either impress her or disappear when she turned her attention on them. Well, she murmured, circling him like a cat with a mouse. Except the mouse wasn't running, wasn't cowering, wasn't playing the game the way it was supposed to be played. "You're full of surprises, aren't you? Tell me, janitor boy, do you even know what this is?" She trailed one perfectly manicured finger along the piano's edge. "This is a 1925 Steinway Model D, one of only 300 ever made. It belonged to a Russian count before my father bought it at auction for $2.7 million. She expected him to flinch at the number, expected his eyes to widen, his confidence to crumble. Instead, Noah stepped closer to the piano, and for just a moment, just a heartbeat, his expression softened into something almost reverent. "Concert Hall B," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Lila's breath caught. What did you say? Noah's eyes snapped back to hers, and whatever she'd glimpsed was gone, locked away behind that wall of careful control. Nothing, Miss Harrington. Just nothing. But it wasn't nothing. She knew it wasn't nothing, and suddenly this game she'd started felt less like sport and more like standing at the edge of a cliff in a hurricane. Play, she demanded, her voice sharper now, desperate to regain the upper hand. You want to touch my piano so badly? Then play. Show us all what a janitor knows about music. Lila, one of her friends whispered, Miranda, probably. Always the worried one. Maybe you should. Maybe I should what? Lila spun around, her dress flaring. Let the help think they can just what? Touch our things. Act like they belong. She turned back to Noah, but there was something frantic in her movements now, something that suggested she was running from something rather than chasing it. Noah studied her face for a long moment, really looked at her, like he was seeing past the designer dress and the attitude and the armor of wealth she wrapped around herself. Why? He asked softly. Why what? Why does it matter so much? Whether I can play or not. Whether I touch your piano or not. What are you really angry about, Miss Harrington? The question hit her like a physical blow. Because he was right. This wasn't about the piano. This wasn't even about him. This was about the phone call she'd gotten that morning, the one where her father had informed her that her engagement party was moved up. This was about Marcus Whitmore and his wandering hands and his assumption that her father's money came with a daughter attached. This was about feeling trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a tomb from within. But she couldn't say any of that. Couldn't let this janitor see that kind of vulnerability. So instead, she lifted her chin and smiled that sharp, cruel smile that had been her shield for as long as she could remember. I'm not angry about anything, she lied smoothly. I'm just curious to see how far you'll take this little fantasy of yours. So, she gestured toward the piano bench with a flourish. Sit down, janitor boy. Play me a song. And when you crash and burn, because you will crash and burn, maybe you'll remember your place. But even as the words left her mouth, she found herself hoping, praying, even, that she was wrong. That somehow, impossibly, this quiet man with tired eyes and steady hands would surprise her. Would prove that there was still magic in the world, still something real beneath all the pretty lies and empty promises. Noah looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the piano. Then he did something that made her heart skip a beat and her friends gasp in shock. He smiled. Not a mocking smile. Not a nervous smile. A real smile, sad and sweet, and full of secrets she suddenly desperately wanted to know. All right, Miss Harrington, he said, setting down his dust cloth and walking to the bench. You asked for it. He sat down and placed his hands on the keys. Calloused hands. Working hands. Hands that looked like they belonged on a mop handle, not on a $2 million piano. The first note rang out clear and true, and Lila Harrington's world began to fall apart. The music that filled the ballroom wasn't just sound. It was liquid gold, liquid heartbreak, liquid hope all rolled into one. Noah's fingers moved across the keys like they were coming home after a long, terrible journey, and the melody that poured out was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece so complex, so emotionally devastating, that even conservatory-trained pianists struggled with it. But Noah wasn't struggling. He was flying. Lila's mocking smile died on her lips. Around the ballroom, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Servers paused with trays in their hands. Even the portraits on the walls seemed to lean forward to listen. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. Janitors didn't play like this. Janitors didn't make music that reached inside your chest and squeezed your heart until tears started forming in your eyes without your permission. But as Noah's hands danced across the keys, as the melody soared and crashed and rebuilt itself again and again, Lila found herself transported. She was 8 years old again, sitting in this same ballroom while her mother played, before the cancer, before the slow, terrible fade that had left Lila alone with a father who loved money more than memories. Her mother had played this same piece. This exact piece, on this exact piano, in this exact spot. How could he know? How could this stranger, this janitor, reach into her most precious memory and make it real again? The music built to its climactic passage, the part that always made Lila's mother pause to wipe away tears, and Noah's eyes found hers across the room. For a heartbeat, she saw something there that made her breath catch, recognition. Like he knew exactly what this piece meant to her. Like he was playing it specifically for her. Impossible. The final notes rang out into absolute silence. Noah's hands stilled on the keys, but he didn't look away from her. Didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just sat there, waiting. The ballroom erupted. Holy shit. Miranda breathed, apparently forgetting every rule of proper society their finishing school had drilled into them. Where did you learn to play like that? Demanded Priscilla, Lila's most competitive friend, the one who couldn't stand to see anyone excel at anything. That was professional level, whispered James Crawford, a family friend whose son had just graduated from Juilliard. That was concert pianist level. But Lila couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who had just turned her world upside down with 10 minutes of music. Noah stood up from the bench, straightening his uniform with movements that were suddenly, impossibly graceful. "Thank you for letting me play your piano, Miss Harrington," he said formally, like nothing extraordinary had just happened. Like he hadn't just revealed himself to be a musical genius hiding in janitor's clothes. "You?" Lila's voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "You can really play." "Yes. But you're a janitor." Something dark flickered across his face. "Yes. How? Where did you learn? Does it matter?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to face. Because the answer was yes, it mattered. It mattered more than anything. Because if he could play like that, if he could make music that beautiful, that devastating, then everything she thought she knew about the world, about people, about herself, was wrong. "The deal," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Noah raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. The deal?" I said if you could play, I'd marry you." Her cheeks burned, but she couldn't take it back now. Couldn't pretend it hadn't happened with 50 people as witnesses. A muscle in Noah's jaw tightened. "You were joking." "Was I?" The silence stretched between them again, but this time it was different. Dangerous. Full of possibilities that scared the hell out of both of them. "Miss Harrington," Noah said carefully, "you don't know anything about me. I know you can play piano like an angel. That's not enough to build a marriage on." "No," she agreed, surprising herself with her honesty. "But it's a start." He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Something that looked almost like possibility, hope, fear. "Your friends are staring," he said quietly. Lila glanced around the ballroom and realized he was right. Not just her friends, everyone was staring. Servants, guests who'd wandered in during the impromptu concert, even her father's security team. All of them watching this impossible scene unfold. The heiress and the janitor, standing by a $2 million piano, negotiating the terms of their lives. "Let them stare," she said, surprised by her own boldness. Noah's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, a spoiled rich girl playing with people for her own amusement." The words should have stung. They probably would have, a few hours ago. But standing here, looking at this man who had just made her feel more in 10 minutes than she'd felt in years, Lila found she couldn't be offended. "Maybe I am," she said. "Maybe that's exactly what I am. But maybe I don't want to be that anymore." Something passed between them then, an understanding, a recognition of two people standing at the edge of something that could change everything or destroy them both. "Miss Harrington." The voice cut through the moment like a blade. Cold, disapproving, absolutely furious. Lila's blood turned to ice. She didn't have to turn around to know who was speaking, but she did anyway, because hiding had never been an option in the Harrington family. Richard Harrington stood in the ballroom doorway like an avenging angel in a $1,000 suit. At 55, he was still an imposing man, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that made boardrooms fall silent and competitors break into cold sweats. His steel-gray eyes swept the room, taking in the crowd of gawking servants and guests, the piano, his daughter standing far too close to the help. When his gaze landed on Noah, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What?" he said with the kind of controlled fury that was somehow more terrifying than shouting, "is going on here?" "Daddy." Lila's voice was steady, but Noah caught the slight tremor in her hands. You were just making a spectacle of yourself in front of the entire household." Richard Harrington's voice could have cut glass. Again, he stepped into the ballroom, and the crowd parted before him like water. Servants disappeared with the practiced efficiency of people who knew when to make themselves invisible. Even Lila's friends suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere, melting away until only the three of them remained. Well, almost. Noah noticed that a few people lingered at the edges of the room, close enough to see what happened next, far enough away to claim plausible deniability if things went badly. Mr. Harrington, Noah said, stepping slightly away from Lila. Not retreating, exactly, but making it clear he understood the situation. I was cleaning the piano. Your daughter asked me to play something. I thought it would be harmless. Harmless. Richard's laugh was sharp as broken glass. You thought it would be harmless to put your hands on a $2 million instrument. To presume to entertain my daughter and her guests. His eyes narrowed. Tell me, boy, what's your name? Noah Mitchell, sir. Well, Mr. Mitchell, do you have any idea what that piano is worth? What this house is worth? What my daughter is worth? The last question hung in the air like a challenge, and Noah felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. He'd been here before, not in this exact situation, but in variations of it. The wealthy looking down at him, reminding him of his place, making sure he understood the vast gulf between their world and his. But this time felt different. This time, there was Lila, standing between her father and him, her chin raised in defiance even though her hands were still shaking. I know what the piano is worth, Noah said quietly. I don't presume to know what your daughter is worth. That's not for me to decide. Richard's eyebrows shot up, and Noah realized his mistake immediately. He'd been too honest, too direct. Rich men like Richard Harrington didn't want honesty from the help. They wanted deference. Interesting answer, Richard said, his voice dangerously soft. And tell me, Mr. Mitchell, where exactly did you learn to play like that? Because I've heard trained musicians struggle with that particular piece. Noah's jaw tightened. This was the question he'd been dreading, the one that would unravel everything. I had some lessons when I was younger. Some lessons? Richard smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. Some lessons don't produce that level of skill. Maybe I'm a fast learner. Or maybe, Richard said, stepping closer, you're not exactly what you appear to be. Maybe there's more to your story than you're letting on. Lila looked between her father and Noah, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. What does it matter where he learned? He played beautifully. He's the help, Lila. Richard's voice cracked like a whip. The help doesn't play $2 million pianos. The help doesn't make deals with my daughter. And the help certainly doesn't stand in my ballroom acting like they belong here. But I invited him to play, Lila protested. I made the challenge. If anyone's to blame. You're right, Richard said, his tone shifting to something almost gentle. Almost. You are to blame. For forgetting who you are. For forgetting what you owe this family. He turned back to Noah, and the gentleness vanished. As for you, Mr. Mitchell, I think it's time you remembered your place as well. Noah felt the familiar weight of shame and anger settling on his shoulders. The same weight he'd carried for 3 years now, ever since everything fell apart. Ever since he'd gone from concert halls to cleaning supplies, from standing ovations to standing invisibly in corners. But then Lila stepped forward, placing herself squarely between her father and Noah, and suddenly the weight felt lighter. No, she said simply. Richard blinked, clearly not expecting the rebellion. Excuse me. I said no. You don't get to decide what Noah is worth. You don't get to dismiss him just because he doesn't fit into your neat little categories. Her voice was gaining strength with each word. He played like an angel, Daddy. He made music that made everyone in this room stop and listen. That means something. It means he has a talent he's been hiding, Richard snapped. It means he's been lying to us from the moment he walked through our doors. And it means, he continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, that he's exactly the kind of person we can't trust in our home. Noah felt the words hit him like physical blows. Because Richard wasn't wrong. He had been hiding his talent. He had been lying, by omission if nothing else. And standing here in his janitor's uniform, watching Lila defend him to her father, he'd never felt more like a fraud. You're right, he said quietly, and both Harringtons turned to look at him. You're absolutely right, Mr. Harrington. I haven't been completely honest. Noah, no, Lila whispered, but he shook his head. Your father deserves to know who he's been employing. And you deserve to know who you're defending. He took a deep breath, feeling like he was about to jump off a cliff. My name is Noah Mitchell. I'm 26 years old. And 3 years ago, I was a concert pianist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. You're lying. I wish I was. Noah's voice was steady, but Lila could see the pain beneath the words. I had a recording contract, a tour scheduled, reviews that called me the most promising young pianist of his generation. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. And then my sister got sick. Lila's breath caught. Sick. Leukemia. Stage 4. The insurance company called it a pre-existing condition and dropped her coverage. The treatments, they cost more than most people make in a lifetime. Noah's hands clenched into fists. So I cashed in everything. The recording contract, the tour, my reputation. Sold my piano, my apartment, everything I owned. Took out loans against my future earnings. And when that wasn't enough, you quit, Richard said, and there was something almost like understanding in his voice. I quit. Took the first job I could find that paid cash daily. Started cleaning houses, offices, wherever they'd have me. Been doing it for 3 years now, sending every penny I make to pay for Emma's treatments. He looked directly at Richard. So you're right, Mr. Harrington. I'm not what I appear to be. I'm not just the help. I'm the help with a past that I can't afford to reclaim. The ballroom was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Lila stared at Noah like she was seeing him for the first time, which, in a way, she was. Your sister, she whispered. Is she okay? Something soft flickered across Noah's face. She's in remission. Has been for 8 months now. But the debt? He shrugged. That's going to take a few more years to clear. Richard studied Noah with new eyes, and Lila could see her father's business mind working. What you're telling me is that you sacrificed a lucrative career to save your sister's life. I'm telling you that I made the only choice I could live with. And now? What happens now that you've blown your cover, so to speak? Noah looked at Lila, then back at Richard. Now I finish my shift, collect my pay, and find another job. One where the boss doesn't mind hiring an ex-musician with a mountain of debt. You don't have to leave, Lila said suddenly. Daddy, he doesn't have to leave. He's been doing good work. And just because he can play piano doesn't mean. Actually, Richard interrupted, and there was something calculating in his expression. It changes everything. Both Noah and Lila looked at him warily. You see, Richard continued, I've been looking for entertainment for your engagement party, Lila. Live music, something classy and sophisticated. The quartet I booked just canceled, food poisoning, apparently. Left me in quite a bind with less than 2 weeks to go. Lila's face went pale. The engagement party. Daddy, about that. Is next Saturday night, Richard said firmly. As planned. But finding quality musicians on such short notice. He looked at Noah. Tell me, Mr. Mitchell, what would it cost to hire a concert-level pianist for a private party? Noah blinked, clearly not expecting the question. For an event like that? Probably 5 to 10,000, depending on the performer. And would you be available? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Noah looked at Lila, saw something desperate and pleading in her eyes, then looked back at Richard. Mr. Harrington, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think it would be appropriate. $10,000, Richard said simply. Cash. For 4 hours of playing at my daughter's engagement party. Lila made a small, wounded sound. Daddy, please, you can't make him. I'm not making him do anything. I'm offering him a job. A very well-paying job that would go a long way toward clearing those debts he mentioned. Richard's smile was sharp as a blade. Of course, if he's too proud to accept honest work. It was masterfully done, Lila had to admit. Her father had backed Noah into a corner, refused the job and seem ungrateful, accept it, and be forced to watch her get engaged to another man. But there was something else in her father's expression, something that made her wonder if this was really about the engagement party at all. Richard Harrington didn't do anything without multiple angles, multiple outcomes planned in advance. Noah was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. 10,000, he said finally. Plus your regular cleaning wages, of course. I'm not unreasonable. And after the party? Richard shrugged. After the party, we'll see. Perhaps we can work out a more permanent arrangement. I do host a number of events throughout the year that require entertainment. Lila watched this negotiation with growing horror. Her father was buying Noah. Not his silence, exactly, but his compliance. Making sure he would be there to watch her marry Marcus Whitmore. Making sure he understood exactly where he stood in the Harrington family hierarchy. I need to think about it, Noah said. Of course. Richard checked his expensive watch. Take all the time you need. But I'll need an answer by tomorrow morning. The invitations have already gone out, and I'd hate to disappoint our guests. I understand. Excellent. Richard turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Mitchell? I trust this conversation will remain between us. I wouldn't want word getting out about your previous career. People might get the wrong idea. It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't not a threat either. Noah nodded stiffly. Good. Lila, I'll see you at dinner. We have some final details to discuss about the party. Richard's eyes flicked between his daughter and Noah one last time. I trust you can find your way back to your cleaning duties, Mr. Mitchell. And then he was gone, leaving them alone in the vast ballroom with its golden chandeliers and its $2 million piano and the weight of everything that had just changed between them. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Lila stood frozen, watching Noah's face, trying to read the emotions flickering across his features. So, she said finally, her voice smaller than she'd intended. A concert pianist. Former concert pianist, Noah corrected, moving to collect his forgotten dust cloth from the piano bench. Why didn't you tell me? He looked at her with something that might have been amusement. When you were mocking me for touching your piano. When you were announcing to the room that the help didn't know their place. The words stung because they were true. That's not. I didn't mean. You didn't mean what, exactly? To be cruel? To put me in my place? Or you didn't mean to find out that I might actually have been worth talking to? Lila flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? Noah turned to face her fully, and she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Hurt. Real hurt, layered beneath the control and the dignity. You want to know why I didn't tell you? Because this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. The questions, the pity, the confusion about what box to put me in. I don't pity you. No? Then what do you feel, Miss Harrington? Because an hour ago, I was invisible to you. Now suddenly you're defending me to your father and looking at me like I'm some kind of puzzle you need to solve. He was right, and they both knew it. An hour ago, Noah had been part of the scenery. Useful, perhaps, but not really worth noticing. Now he was what? Still the help, technically, but also something else. Something that didn't fit into the neat categories she'd built her life around. I feel. She struggled for words. I feel like I've been an idiot. Noah's eyebrows rose slightly. That's not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? Honestly, I expected you to pretend this conversation never happened. To go back to treating me like furniture until I find another job. Lila studied his face, seeing past the tiredness and the wariness to something else. A carefully banked intelligence. A gentleness that 3 years of manual labor hadn't managed to erode. Is that what you want? For me to pretend? I want, Noah said slowly, to finish paying for my sister's medical bills. I want to not have to choose between rent and groceries. And I want to not have to explain to rich girls why their world isn't the only world that matters. The words should have made her angry. Should have sent her storming out in a huff, ready to tell her father to fire this insolent janitor immediately. Instead, they made her feel something she'd rarely experienced in her 23 years of privilege: shame. You're right, she said quietly. You're absolutely right. I live in a bubble, and I've been acting like everyone else is just decoration in my life. Noah looked surprised again. Miss Harrington. Lila. My name is Lila. She took a step closer to him, close enough to see the faint scar on his chin, the calluses on his hands from years of cleaning. And I want to ask you something, but I need you to be honest with me. Okay, when you played just now, that piece, the Chopin, did you know what it meant to me? Noah was quiet for a long moment. What did it mean to you? My mother used to play it. Before she died. It was her favorite piece, and she played it on that exact piano. Lila's voice caught slightly. She died when I was 12. Cancer. And I haven't heard that piece played live since her funeral. Understanding dawned in Noah's eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't know. But you felt it, didn't you? When you were playing. You felt something. He nodded slowly. I felt sadness. Loss. But also love. Like the music was meant for someone specific. Lila's breath caught. How could you possibly know that? Music is a language, Noah said softly. And that piano, it has memory. It remembers every song that's ever been played on it. every emotion that's ever been poured into its keys. When I sat down, I could feel. He paused, looking almost embarrassed. This is going to sound crazy. Tell me. I could feel love in those keys. Deep, maternal love. And grief. Someone had played that piece on that piano with their whole heart, over and over again. He met her eyes. It was your mother, wasn't it? Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks before she could stop them. How is that possible? I don't know, but it's why I played it. It felt like the piano wanted me to play it. Like it needed to sing that song again. They stood there in the golden light of the chandelier, the space between them charged with something neither could name. Lila felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice. One step forward would change everything, but she didn't know if she was brave enough to take it. The engagement party, she said suddenly. Noah's expression shuddered. Congratulations. When do I meet the lucky man? You don't understand. I don't want to marry him. Then don't. It's not that simple. My father, this marriage is a business deal. Marcus Whitmore's family owns half the shipping companies on the East Coast. A merger between our companies would make us one of the most powerful trading dynasties in the country. And you're the currency. The blunt statement hit her like a slap. Ah, yes. I suppose I am. So what happens if you refuse? Lila laughed bitterly. Have you met my father? Refusal isn't an option. He's already made it clear that if I don't go through with this marriage, I'll be cut off completely. No money, no access to the family accounts, no nothing. Would that be so terrible? I wouldn't know how to survive without money. I've never held a job, never paid a bill, never had to worry about where my next meal was coming from. She looked at him with something like envy. You sacrificed everything for your sister. You know what it means to work for something, to fight for someone you love. I don't even know who I am without all of this. She gestured around the ballroom. You could learn. Could I? Or would I just be another useless rich girl pretending to understand the real world? Noah considered this seriously. Maybe. Or maybe you'd surprise yourself. The way you surprised me tonight. The way you surprised me tonight, he corrected. Standing up to your father, defending someone you barely know. That took courage. It was stupid. It won't change anything. It changed something for me. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Lila felt her heart racing, felt the same flutter in her stomach she'd experienced earlier when he'd refused to back down from her taunts. Noah, she said softly. Miss Harrington. Lila, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Why did you really make that challenge tonight? About marrying me if I could play. The question caught her off guard. She'd been expecting him to ask about the engagement, about Marcus, about her father's offer. I don't know. It was supposed to be a joke, a way to put you in your place. But when you didn't back down, when you looked at me like you could see right through all my armor. She took a shaky breath. I think part of me hoped you really could play. Part of me hoped you'd prove me wrong about everything. And now that I have, now I don't know what to think. About you, about myself, about any of it. She looked at him desperately. What are you going to do? About my father's offer. Noah was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. What do you want me to do? I want you to say no. I want you to walk away and find another job and forget this night ever happened. Because it would be easier? Because it would be safer. For both of us. Her voice broke slightly. Because if you take that job, if you play at my engagement party, I'll have to stand there and watch me promise to marry someone else. And I don't think I can bear that. The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and honest and terrifying. Lila, Noah said softly, and the way he said her name made her heart skip a beat. What are you saying? I'm saying that in one evening, you've made me feel more alive than I've felt in years. I'm saying that when you played my mother's song, it felt like you were playing it for me. I'm saying that I'm terrified because I think I'm falling for a man I can't have, in a situation that's impossible, and I don't know what to do about it. Noah took a step toward her, then stopped himself. This is crazy. I know. We barely know each other. I know. Your father would destroy me if he suspected anything. I know that too. And yet, Noah said, reaching out to gently touch her cheek, I can't stop thinking about the way you looked when I was playing. Like the music was unlocking something inside you. Lila leaned into his touch despite herself. What are we doing, Noah? Something stupid. Something dangerous. Something that could ruin both our lives. And he smiled, and it transformed his entire face. And I haven't felt this alive in 3 years. Before either of them could think better of it, before reality could intrude again, Noah leaned down and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, like a question being asked. But when Lila kissed him back, threading her fingers through his dark hair, it became something else entirely. Desperate, hungry, full of 3 years of loneliness and a lifetime of feeling trapped. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lila felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "This is insane," she whispered against his lips. "Completely insane," he agreed, not pulling away. "My father will kill us both. Probably. And I'm engaged to someone else." "I know. So what do we do now?" Noah pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Now I go home and think about whether I'm brave enough to take your father's job. And you go to dinner and pretend this conversation never happened. And then we see what tomorrow brings." But even as he said it, they both knew that tomorrow was going to bring complications neither of them was prepared for. Because in the space of one evening, everything had changed. The invisible janitor had become visible. The untouchable heiress had been touched. And somewhere in the golden light of the Harrington ballroom, two people from different worlds had found something worth risking everything for. The question now was whether they'd be brave enough to reach for it. 3 days later, Lila hadn't slept properly in 72 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Noah's hands on the piano keys, felt his touch on her cheek, heard his voice saying her name like it meant something precious. She'd barely seen him since that night in the ballroom. Their paths had crossed once. She'd been coming down the main staircase as he was cleaning the foyer, and their eyes had met for exactly 3 seconds before her father appeared, and Noah had melted back into invisibility. But those 3 seconds had been enough to confirm that she hadn't imagined it. The connection was real, electric, dangerous. Now she sat in her father's study, trying to focus on wedding preparations while her mind wandered to impossible scenarios where she and Noah could actually have a future together. "The florist needs to know about the centerpieces," her father was saying, not looking up from his laptop. "And the caterer wants confirmation on the menu." "Lila, are you listening?" "Of course," she lied, shuffling through the stack of vendor contracts on her lap. "The centerpieces. Right." Richard looked up, studying her with sharp eyes. "You've been distracted lately. Having second thoughts about Marcus?" The question was casual, but Lila knew better than to trust her father's casual tones. "No second thoughts. Just nervous, I suppose. It's a big step. The biggest, but the right one for our family." He closed the laptop and leaned back in his leather chair. "Speaking of big steps, I've hired our pianist for the party." Lila's heart stopped. "You have?" "Mr. Mitchell accepted my offer. Seemed quite grateful for the opportunity, actually." Richard washed his daughter's face carefully. "I thought you'd be pleased. You seemed to enjoy his playing the other night." Yes, it was adequate. The word came out strangled, and she hoped her father didn't notice. "Adequate?" Richard's eyebrows rose. "My dear, the man played like a concert professional." Which, as it turns out, he was. Did some research after our conversation. Noah Mitchell, former rising star of the Chicago Symphony. Quite the tragic story, actually. Gave up everything to save his sister's life. Lila's hands tightened on the contracts. How noble of him. Indeed. The kind of sacrifice that speaks to character, don't you think? Richard's voice was deceptively mild. "Though I can't help but wonder what drives a man to make such extreme choices. Love? Guilt? Pride? Does it matter?" "Everything matters, Lila. Every decision, every motivation, every secret. That's what separates successful people from the rest. The ability to see all the angles." He stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the estate grounds. "For instance, I know that you've been asking the staff about Mr. Mitchell. Innocent questions, of course. About his schedule, his background, his family situation." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. "I was just curious." Curiosity is natural, but obsession. Richard turned to face her, and his expression was granite hard. "Obsession is dangerous." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you? Then let me be clear. Mr. Mitchell is an employee. A temporary employee, hired for a specific job. After the engagement party, he'll return to his regular duties or find employment elsewhere. He is not, under any circumstances, someone you should be developing an interest in." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Lila forced herself to meet her father's gaze steadily. "Of course not. That would be inappropriate. Exactly. Inappropriate. And potentially catastrophic for everyone involved. Richard moved back to his desk, shuffling papers with studied casualness. I'd hate for Mr. Mitchell to lose his job over a misunderstanding, especially given his sister's medical expenses. There it was, the real threat. Not just Noah's employment, but his sister's life hanging in the balance. Lila felt sick. I understand, Daddy. Good. Now, about these centerpieces. But Lila was no longer listening. All she could think about was Noah, somewhere in this vast house, probably having no idea that his fate was being decided in boardrooms and studies by people who saw him as nothing more than a chess piece to be moved around at will. She had to warn him, had to find a way to see him, to tell him that her father knew something was happening between them. But how? Every move she made was being watched now, every question noted and filed away for future reference. As if summoned by her thoughts, there was a soft knock at the study door. "Come in," Richard called. Mrs. Chun, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrington. There's been a small accident in the music room. Some water damage from a leaky pipe upstairs. I thought you should know before the party." Richard frowned. "How bad is it?" "Not terrible, but the carpet will need to be replaced and some of the furniture moved. I've called the repair crew, but they can't start until tomorrow." "And the piano?" "Unharmed, sir, but we'll need to move it temporarily while they work." Lila's pulse quickened. The music room. That's where Noah would be working, preparing for the party. If she could volunteer to oversee the cleanup, I could supervise the moving, she offered, trying to sound casual. "Make sure nothing gets damaged." Richard studied her for a moment. "That's thoughtful of you, but hardly necessary. Mrs. Chun can handle it. But the piano is so valuable, and with the engagement party coming up." Lila let her voice trail off suggestively. "If anything happened to it." "She has a point," Mrs. Chun said diplomatically. "It might be wise to have family oversight, given the circumstances." Richard was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing options. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, but I want a full report on any damages, and I want this handled quickly. The last thing we need is delays with the party so close." "Of course." Lila stood up, trying not to appear too eager. "I'll go assess the situation right now." She was almost to the door when her father's voice stopped her. "Lila." "Yes." "Remember what we discussed about appropriate behavior and maintaining boundaries." Their eyes met across the study, and Lila saw the warning clearly. One wrong move, and Noah would pay the price. "I remember," she said quietly. But as she left the study and walked toward the music room, her heart was pounding with something that might have been fear or anticipation or both. Because she was about to see Noah again, alone, and despite all the threats and warnings and impossible circumstances, she couldn't bring herself to care about anything except the way her pulse quickened at the thought of being near him. She found him in the music room, down on his hands and knees with a wet vacuum, methodically extracting water from the Persian carpet. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. "Miss Harrington," he said finally, getting to his feet. "I didn't expect." "There's been a leak," she said unnecessarily, since he was clearly already dealing with the aftermath. "My father sent me to supervise." Something flickered in Noah's eyes, understanding, maybe, or recognition that they were both playing roles now. "Of course, the damage isn't too severe, but we'll need to move some of the furniture to prevent warping." "The piano?" "Should be fine where it is, but Mrs. Chun wants it shifted a few feet just to be safe." He gestured toward the Steinway, which dominated the smaller music room just as it had the ballroom. "I'll need help with it, though. Too valuable to risk moving alone." Lila nodded, trying to ignore the way her skin prickled with awareness every time he looked at her. "What do you need me to do?" For the next 20 minutes, they worked in careful silence, moving chairs and tables away from the damaged area, rolling up the waterlogged sections of carpet. It was the most mundane activity imaginable, and yet Lila was hyper-aware of every brush of Noah's fingers against hers when they lifted something together. Every time he leaned close enough that she could smell his soap and the faint scent of cleaning supplies that seemed to cling to all his clothes. Finally, only the piano remained. "We'll need to lift it slightly and slide these furniture pads underneath," Noah explained, pulling protective discs from his cleaning cart. "Just enough to get it away from the wall." "Is it safe? I mean, won't we damage it?" "I've moved pianos before." He said it matter-of-factly, but Lila caught the underlying meaning. back when he was a musician, when he belonged in rooms like this instead of cleaning them. They positioned themselves on either side of the piano bench, and on Noah's count, lifted together. The instrument was heavier than Lila had expected, and for a moment, she thought she'd lose her grip. But Noah was strong, his arms steady, and together they managed to shift the piano the necessary few inches. Perfect, Noah said, straightening up and wiping sweat from his forehead. That should do it. But as he stepped back, his foot caught on the vacuum cord, and he stumbled slightly. Lila reached out instinctively to steady him, her hands catching his arms, and suddenly they were standing very close. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "I'm fine," he said, but he didn't step away. Neither did she. "Noah," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, just knowing that she needed to say his name. "We shouldn't," he said softly, even as his hands came up to cover hers. "I know. Your father suspects something. I know that too. If he finds out, he won't." But even as she said it, she knew it was probably a lie. Richard Harrington didn't miss much, and she'd never been good at hiding her feelings. "This is impossible," Noah said, but his thumbs were tracing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Everything about this is impossible, but I can't stop thinking about you. About that night, about the way you played, about the way you looked at me like I was worth something more than my trust fund." Noah's expression was tortured. "You are worth more. So much more. But I can't give you anything, Lila. I can barely keep my head above water as it is. I don't care about money." Easy to say when you've never been without it. The words stung because they were probably true. But standing there with him, feeling the warmth of his hands through the thin fabric of her blouse, Lila thought she might be willing to find out what it meant to live without the safety net she'd always known. "Try me," she said. Noah stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war being fought behind his eyes. Desire against practicality, hope against hard experience. "Your engagement party is in 3 days," he said finally. "I know. I'm going to have to sit at that piano and play while you dance with another man, while you promise to marry him." The pain in his voice made her chest ache. "I know. And then what? We pretend we feel nothing while you plan a wedding? We steal moments in empty rooms like this is some kind of sordid affair." "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what happens next. All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel like myself for the first time in my life. Like I'm not just playing a role someone else wrote for me." Noah closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was a resolution there that made her stomach clench with fear. "I can't do this," he said, stepping back and breaking the connection between them. "I can't be the reason you destroy your life. What if I want to destroy it? What if this life isn't worth preserving? Then you figure that out on your own, without dragging me down with you." His voice was harsh now, desperate. "I won't be responsible for you losing everything, Lila. I won't be the man who ruined Richard Harrington's daughter." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Noah immediately busied himself with the vacuum cord while Lila moved to examine a water stain on the wall, but her hands were shaking. "Miss Harrington?" Mrs. Chin appeared in the doorway. "How is the cleanup progressing?" "Very well," Lila managed, surprised by how normal her voice sounded. "Mr. Mitchell has been very thorough." "Excellent. The repair crew will be here first thing tomorrow morning." Mrs. Chin's eyes flicked between them, and Lila wondered what she saw. "Will you need any additional assistance, Mr. Mitchell?" "No, ma'am. I should be finished here within the hour." "Very good. Miss Harrington, your father is looking for you. Something about final menu approvals." Lila nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She started toward the door, then paused without looking back. "Thank you for your help with the piano, Mr. Mitchell." "Of course, Miss Harrington. Just doing my job." The formality in his voice was like a knife to her heart, but she forced herself to walk away. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. 3 days. In 3 days, she would stand in front of 100 guests and promise to marry Marcus Whitmore. And Noah would be there, playing background music, watching it all happen. Unless she found the courage to do something desperate and probably stupid before then. The question was, did she have that kind of courage? And if she did, would it be enough to save them both? Or would it just destroy them more completely than silence ever could? 2 days before the engagement party, Marcus Whitmore arrived at the Harrington estate like a conquering general returning from war. Expensive car, expensive suit, expensive smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lila watched from her bedroom window as he pulled up the circular drive and felt her stomach turn to lead. He was handsome in a calculated way, tall, blonde, with the kind of strong jaw that looked good in newspaper photos and campaign ads. At 28, he'd already taken control of his family's shipping empire and doubled their profits in 2 years. On paper, he was perfect, the ideal husband for a woman in her position. In reality, he made her skin crawl. "Lila, darling." His voice boomed through the foyer as she descended the main staircase, bracing herself for the performance ahead. "You look absolutely radiant." He swept her into his arms for a kiss that was just a little too long, a little too possessive for someone she wasn't even married to yet. When he finally released her, his hands lingered on her waist in a way that made her want to step back. "Hello, Marcus," she said, forcing a smile. "How was your trip?" "Productive. Closed the Singapore deal, which means we'll have expanded our Pacific routes by 30% before the wedding." He said it like he was giving her a gift, like she should be grateful for his business acumen. "How wonderful," she managed. "Where's your father?" "We have some final details to discuss about the merger paperwork." Of course, because that's what this was really about. Not love, not even compatibility, but profit margins and shipping routes and the kind of dynastic power that could only be achieved through strategic marriage. "He's in his study. I'll show you." "No need. I know the way." Marcus brushed past her, already focused on the next item on his agenda. "We'll catch up properly at dinner. Where's something blue? It brings out your eyes." And then he was gone, striding down the hall like he owned the place. Which, Lila supposed, he soon would. At least part of it. She stood in the foyer for a moment, feeling utterly hollow. This was her future, a lifetime of being told what to wear, what to think, how to feel. A lifetime of being valuable only for what her name and her father's money could bring to the Whitmore shipping empire. "Miss Harrington?" She turned to find Noah in the doorway, mop bucket in hand, clearly having witnessed at least part of the interaction with Marcus. His expression was carefully neutral, but she caught something in his eyes that might have been sympathy. "Mr. Mitchell," she said formally, aware that other staff members were within earshot. "I trust you're prepared for tomorrow evening's rehearsal?" "Yes, miss. I've been practicing the requested pieces." Their eyes met for just a moment, long enough for her to see the question he couldn't ask aloud. "Are you okay?" She wasn't okay. She was the opposite of okay. But standing there in her father's foyer, with Marcus's cologne still lingering in the air and the weight of tomorrow night's engagement party pressing down on her like a physical thing, she couldn't admit that. Not even to herself. "Excellent," she said instead. "I'm sure the evening will be memorable." Something flickered across Noah's face at her choice of words, but before he could respond, Marcus's voice boomed from down the hall. "Lila, come settle an argument between your father and me about the seating arrangements." She closed her eyes for just a moment, gathering strength for the next performance. When she opened them, Noah was gone, disappeared back into the invisible world of the help where he belonged, where it was safe, where she was beginning to think she'd rather be. The night before, sleep was impossible. Lila lay in her four-poster bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway mark the hours. Midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Each chime brought her closer to tomorrow night, to the moment when she would officially become Marcus Whitmore's fiancée. At 3 in the morning, she gave up and slipped out of bed. Maybe a walk through the house would help clear her head, help her figure out how she was supposed to get through the next 24 hours without losing her mind completely. The house was different at night, shadows and moonlight transforming familiar spaces into something mysterious and strange. She padded down the hallway in her silk nightgown and robe, not really having a destination in mind until she found herself standing outside the music room. The door was slightly ajar, and from within came the soft sound of piano music. Not the sharp, precise notes of practice, but something gentler, more personal. Lila pushed the door open quietly and peered inside. Noah sat at the piano bench, fingers moving across the keys with the same grace she remembered from that first night. But this time, he wasn't performing. He was composing, working through a melody that was heartbreaking in its simplicity, beautiful and sad and full of yearning. He was dressed in jeans and a white t-shirt instead of his uniform, and in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, he looked less like the help and more like what he really was, an artist, a musician, someone whose soul spoke through his fingertips. Lila must have made a sound, because he looked up suddenly, his hands stilling on the keys. "Miss Harrington," he said, starting to stand. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I couldn't sleep, and sometimes playing helps." "Don't stop," she said quickly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Please." It was beautiful. Noah hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and the pull of the music still flowing through him. "It's late. You should be sleeping." "So should you." She moved closer to the piano, drawn by the melody that still seemed to hang in the air around them. "What were you playing?" "I didn't recognize it." "Nothing. Just something I was working on." "You're composing?" A faint flush colored his cheeks. "I used to. Before. It's probably rusty." "It was beautiful," she repeated, and meant it. "Play it again." He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her silk nightgown, her bare feet, her hair loose around her shoulders. She probably looked like something out of a fairy tale, the princess in her tower, wandering the castle at midnight. "I shouldn't be here," he said finally. "Neither should I. But here we are. Tomorrow night. I don't want to think about tomorrow night." The words came out more desperately than she'd intended. "Please, Noah. Just play for me. Let me pretend, just for a little while, that tomorrow isn't coming." Something in her voice must have gotten through to him, because he settled back onto the bench and placed his hands on the keys. The melody began again, soft and haunting, and Lila felt tears start to form in her eyes. "What's it about?" she asked quietly. "The song." Noah's fingers never faltered, but she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "It's about loving something you can't have. About watching something beautiful slip away and knowing you're powerless to stop it." The tears came freely now, sliding down her cheeks as the music wrapped around her like an embrace. Because she knew, they both knew, that he wasn't just talking about the song. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's heartbreaking," he corrected. "Same thing sometimes." The music built to a crescendo, then gentled again, and Lila found herself moving closer to the piano without conscious thought. Soon she was standing right beside the bench, close enough to see the concentration on Noah's face, the way his eyes closed when he reached the most emotional passages. "Lila," he said softly, his hands slowing but not stopping. "We can't do this." "Do what?" "Stand here like this. Pretend like tomorrow doesn't matter. Pretend like this is anything other than torture for both of us." She reached out and placed her hand over his on the keys, stopping the music. "What if I don't marry him?" Noah's eyes snapped open, fixing on her face. "What? What if I say no? What if I refuse to go through with it?" "Your father would never allow that. The contracts are already signed, the merger already in motion. Contracts can be broken. Mergers can be canceled." Her voice was growing stronger with each word, as if speaking the possibility aloud was making it real. "There would be consequences, yes. Probably terrible ones. But people survive without money, don't they? You've been doing it for 3 years." Noah stared at her, and she could see the war being fought behind his eyes. Hope battling against hard experience. Love fighting against practicality. "Lila, you don't understand what you're saying. You've never been without money. Never had to choose between rent and groceries. Never had to watch someone you love suffer because you couldn't afford to help them. Then teach me," she said fiercely. "Show me what it means to live in the real world. I'm not afraid of being poor, Noah. I'm afraid of being empty. I'm afraid of spending the rest of my life married to a man who sees me as a business acquisition. And what about me?" The question was raw, desperate. "What happens to me when your father finds out I'm the reason his daughter threw away her future? You think he'll just let me walk away? You think he won't destroy me completely? We could leave. Tonight. Just disappear and start over somewhere else. With what money? What skills? I'm a piano player with massive debt and a sister who depends on me for her medical care. You're a socialite who's never held a job in her life. How long do you think we'd last?" His words were brutal because they were probably true. But looking at him, really looking at him, seeing the pain and the longing and the desperate love he was trying so hard to hide, Lila realized she didn't care. "I don't know," she said simply. "But I'd rather try and fail with you than succeed without you." The silence that followed was deafening. Noah sat frozen at the piano bench, staring at her like she'd just offered him salvation and damnation in the same breath. "You don't mean that," he said finally. "I do. You'll change your mind. When reality sets in, when the money runs out, when you realize what you've given up. Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe I'm stronger than you think. Maybe we both are. Noah stood up abruptly, turning away from the piano and running his hands through his hair. This is insane. You're asking me to help you destroy your life. I'm asking you to help me save it. He spun around to face her, and she was shocked by the intensity in his expression. You want to know what the real world is like, Lila? You want to know what I gave up to save my sister? Fine. He moved to a small table in the corner of the room, where someone had left a stack of sheet music. But instead of looking at the music, he pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. This is my bank account. Negative $47.32. This, he swiped to another screen, is my credit report. So far in the red that I can't even get a loan for a used car. And this, another swipe, is the bill for my sister's last round of treatments. $63,000 that I'm paying off at $200 a month, which means I'll be in debt for the next 26 years. Lila stared at the numbers, trying to process what they meant. She'd never seen a negative bank balance before, had never had to think about money as something that could run out. Now, Noah continued, his voice harsh. You want to give up a trust fund worth millions to run away with me? To live in a studio apartment and eat ramen noodles and worry about whether we can afford gas to get to work? Because that's the reality, Lila. That's what loving me would cost you. She looked at him for a long moment, taking in his defensive posture, the pain in his eyes, the way he was trying to push her away by showing her the ugliest parts of his situation. Okay, she said calmly. Okay. I understand now what I'd be giving up, what we'd be facing. She took a step toward him, and my answer is still yes. Noah stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Did you not hear anything I just said? I heard every word. You're broke, in debt, and struggling to survive. You're offering me a life that would be difficult and uncertain and nothing like what I'm used to. She took another step closer. And it sounds 1,000 times better than marrying Marcus Whitmore. Lila, I know you think I'm naive. I know you think I'll change my mind the first time I have to wash my own dishes or take the bus somewhere. And maybe you're right. Maybe I will hate it and run back to Daddy begging for forgiveness. She was close enough now to reach out and touch his face. But what if I don't? What if I surprise you? What if I surprise myself? Noah closed his eyes and leaned into her touch despite himself. This could destroy us both. We're already being destroyed, just slowly from the inside out. Her thumb traced along his cheekbone. At least this way, we'd be destroyed together. When he opened his eyes, she saw that he was crying. Just a few tears, but enough to break her heart all over again. I love you, he whispered, and the words hit her like a physical blow. I love you too, she whispered back, surprised by how easily the truth came. This is crazy. The best things usually are. And then he was kissing her, desperate and hungry and full of 3 years of loneliness and a lifetime of wanting something he thought he could never have. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and hope and love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Noah rested his forehead against hers. If we do this, he said quietly, there's no going back. Your father will never forgive you. Your life as you know it will be over. Good, she said fiercely. I want it to be over. I want to start fresh, with someone who sees me as more than a walking trust fund. And tomorrow night, the engagement party. Lila thought about Marcus, about her father, about the 100 guests who would be expecting to see her officially enter into a business transaction disguised as a romance. Tomorrow night, she said, I'm going to stand up in front of everyone and tell the truth. That I don't love Marcus Whitmore, that I never could love him, and that I won't marry him. And then, she smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. And then we find out what happens when the princess decides to write her own fairy tale. The engagement party. The Harrington estate had been transformed into something from a magazine cover. White roses and baby's breath adorned every surface. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the main ballroom, and servers in crisp uniforms moved through the crowd carrying champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per plate than most people earned in a week. 150 of the city's elite mingled in their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, all of them here to witness the union of two powerful families. Business associates, politicians, socialites, everyone who mattered in their carefully constructed world. And in the corner, almost invisible behind the gleaming Steinway, sat Noah. He was dressed in the black suit her father had provided, expensive enough to blend in, understated enough to mark him as hired help. His fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the evening's festivities. Classical pieces, jazz standards, the kind of elegant background music that the wealthy expected at their gatherings. But his eyes kept finding Lila across the room. She stood beside Marcus, radiant in a cream-colored silk gown that probably cost more than Noah made in 6 months. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate chignon. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. Gifts from Marcus, no doubt. She looked every inch the perfect society bride, except for her eyes. When their gazes met across the crowded ballroom, Noah could see the fear there. The desperate courage of someone about to jump off a cliff with no idea if there would be anything to catch her. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Harrington's voice boomed across the ballroom as he stepped up to the small podium that had been set up near the piano. If I could have your attention, please. The crowd quieted, turning expectantly toward their host. Noah's hands never stopped moving on the keys, but he shifted to something softer, more subdued. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this joyous occasion, Richard continued, his politician's smile firmly in place. As many of you know, tonight marks the official engagement of my daughter Lila to Marcus Whitmore, son of our dear friends David and Catherine Whitmore. Polite applause rippled through the room. Noah watched Marcus place a possessive hand on the small of Lila's back, saw her stiffen almost imperceptibly at the touch. This union represents more than just the joining of two young people in love, Richard went on, and Noah caught the slight emphasis on the word love, as if even Lila's father couldn't quite sell that particular fiction with a straight face. It represents the merger of two of the oldest and most respected families in our city, and the beginning of what I'm sure will be a long and prosperous partnership. Partnership. Not marriage, not love, partnership. Like they were discussing a corporate acquisition rather than his daughter's future happiness. So please, Richard raised his champagne flute. Join me in toasting the happy couple. To Lila and Marcus. May their future be bright and their success limitless. To Lila and Marcus. The crowd echoed, raising their glasses in unison. Noah's fingers stumbled on the keys for just a moment, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't watching for it. But Lila noticed. Across the room, her eyes found his again, and he saw her take a shaky breath. This was it. The moment they'd talked about, planned for, dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. If she was going to speak up, it had to be now. Marcus stepped forward, his arm sliding around Lila's waist as he took the microphone from her father. Thank you all for being here tonight, he said, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. I have to say, when I first met Lila 3 years ago, I knew immediately that she was something special. He turned to smile at her, and Noah felt his stomach clench. Because Marcus looked genuinely happy, not calculating or businesslike, but truly pleased to be standing there with Lila, which somehow made everything worse. She's beautiful, of course, Marcus continued. But more than that, she's intelligent, gracious, and everything a man could want in a wife. I consider myself the luckiest man in the world that she's agreed to marry me. More applause. Someone in the crowd called out, "Kiss her," and Marcus laughed, pulling Lila closer. Actually, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket, before we get to that, I have something for my beautiful fiancée. Noah watched in horror as Marcus pulled out a small velvet box. The engagement ring. Of course, they hadn't actually made it official yet, hadn't sealed the deal with the traditional symbols of ownership. Lila, Marcus said, dropping to one knee right there in front of everyone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The crowd gasped and cooed appreciatively. Camera phones appeared, capturing the moment for social media and family albums. Richard Harrington beamed with satisfaction, and Lila stood frozen, staring down at the man kneeling before her with a diamond ring that probably cost more than most people's houses. The silence stretched. A few people in the crowd began to whisper, sensing that something wasn't quite right. Marcus's confident smile began to waver slightly. Lila, he prompted gently. She looked up, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found Noah's. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other across the room. Then she took a deep breath and stepped back from Marcus. I can't, she said quietly. The whispers stopped. The entire ballroom fell silent except for the soft notes still coming from the piano. Noah was playing on autopilot now, his attention completely focused on the drama unfolding across the room. "I'm sorry," Lila said, her voice growing stronger. "But I can't marry you, Marcus." Marcus slowly got to his feet, the ring box still open in his hand. "Lila, what? Are you feeling all right? Perhaps you need some air." "I'm fine," she said firmly. "I've never been more clear-headed in my life. And I'm telling you, in front of all these witnesses, that I cannot and will not marry you." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Harrington looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Marcus stood there with his mouth open, clearly unable to process what was happening. And the crowd of elegant socialites stared in shock at the spectacle unfolding before them. "Lila," Richard said, his voice carefully controlled but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." Lila turned to face the crowd, her chin raised defiantly. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth. This engagement, this marriage, it was never about love. It was a business transaction, a merger disguised as a romance." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone's champagne glass hit the marble floor with a crystal crash. "I was supposed to be the perfect daughter," Lila continued, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "Marry the right man, say the right things, play my part in building the Harrington empire. But I won't do it anymore. I won't trade my life for profit margins and shipping routes." "Lila, stop," Richard commanded, his politician's mask finally slipping to reveal the fury beneath. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that I choose love over money. I choose happiness over duty. I choose." Her eyes found Noah's across the room, and she smiled, radiant, terrified, beautiful. "I choose him." Every head in the room turned to follow her gaze. Noah felt 100 pairs of eyes land on him like physical weight, felt the exact moment when the crowd registered what she meant. The whispers started immediately: shock, outrage, confusion. "The piano player?" someone gasped. "Isn't he the janitor?" Another voice hissed. "How scandalous. Who is he?" But Noah barely heard them. All he could see was Lila, standing in the middle of the ballroom in her cream silk gown, choosing him over everything she'd ever known. Slowly, his hands stilled on the piano keys. The music stopped, leaving only the sound of shocked whispers and Richard Harrington's labored breathing. Marcus finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous. Lila, you're obviously having some kind of breakdown. You can't possibly be serious about." He gestured dismissively toward Noah. "About the help. His name is Noah Mitchell," Lila said clearly. "And he's more of a man than you'll ever be." That did it. Marcus's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. "You little, how dare you embarrass me like this? Do you have any idea what this will cost your family? The contracts alone can be canceled," Lila finished. "Yes, I know. There will be consequences. Legal battles, financial losses, social embarrassment. But it's worth it." Richard stepped forward, his voice dangerous. "Lila, you will stop this nonsense immediately. You will apologize to Marcus and our guests, and we will proceed with the engagement as planned." "No." The simple word carried more power than Noah had thought possible. Richard actually took a step back, clearly shocked by his daughter's defiance. "No," Lila repeated, stronger now. "I won't apologize for choosing love. I won't apologize for wanting more than a loveless marriage to a man who sees me as a business asset." She started walking across the ballroom, moving through the crowd that parted before her like she was carrying something contagious. Her destination was clear: the piano, where Noah sat frozen in disbelief. "Lila, if you take another step," Richard's threat hung in the air. She paused, turning back to face her father. "Then what? You'll disown me? Cut me off? Do you really think I care about your money more than my happiness?" "You'll care when you're living in poverty," Richard snapped. "When you're scraping by in some tenement apartment, wondering where your next meal is coming from. You think love will keep you warm when the electricity gets shut off." "Maybe not," Lila admitted. "But at least I'll be alive. Really alive, for the first time in my life." She turned and continued walking toward Noah, who finally found the strength to stand up from the piano bench. His heart was pounding so hard, he was surprised the entire room couldn't hear it. "This is insane," Marcus called after her. "You're throwing away everything for a janitor. A nobody." Lila stopped walking and turned around one last time. When she spoke, Her voice carried clearly across the silent ballroom. He's not a nobody. He's a concert pianist who sacrificed his career to save his sister's life. He's a man who works 3 jobs to pay off medical debts that would crush most people. He's someone who sees music as a language of the soul, not just entertainment for the wealthy. Her eyes blazed with passion. He's more real, more honest, more worthy of love than anyone in this room. She reached Noah then, stopping just in front of him. Up close, he could see that she was trembling, with fear, with adrenaline, with the magnitude of what she'd just done. "Hi," she said softly, like they were alone instead of standing in front of a crowd of scandalized socialites. "Hi," he managed to reply. "So," she said, a shaky smile playing around her lips, "still think I'll change my mind when reality sets in?" Before Noah could answer, Richard's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Security. 2 large men in dark suits appeared at the edges of the ballroom, private security that Richard always employed for large gatherings. They moved toward Noah with purposeful strides. "Remove this man from my property," Richard commanded. Immediately. But Lila stepped between Noah and the approaching security guards. "No. If he goes, I go." "Lila," Noah started. "I mean it," she said, not taking her eyes off her father. "I'm 23 years old, Daddy. Legally an adult. You can't force me to stay here, and you can't force me to marry Marcus." The security guards looked uncertain, clearly not sure how to handle the situation. Richard's face was purple with rage. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "Maybe," Lila agreed, "but it's my mistake to make." She turned back to Noah, reaching for his hand. Her fingers were ice cold but steady as they intertwined with his. "There's something I need to ask you," she said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Remember that night, when you told me about your sister? About the debt? About the life you'd be offering me?" Noah nodded, not trusting his voice. "You asked me if I was sure I could handle it. If I was sure I wanted to give up everything for a life that would be difficult and uncertain." Her smile was radiant now, fearless. "Well, I have my answer." She got down on one knee, right there in the middle of the ballroom, in front of everyone. The crowd gasped collectively. "Noah Mitchell," she said, her voice ringing clear and true. "Will you marry me?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the whispers had stopped. Every person in the room held their breath, waiting for his answer. Noah stared down at this incredible woman who had just thrown away a fortune to kneel before him in a designer gown, offering him everything she had left. His throat was so tight, he could barely speak. "Lila," he whispered, "are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was still smiling. "I love you, Noah. I love your music, your strength, your capacity for sacrifice. I love the way you see beauty in broken things and find hope in impossible situations." Her voice broke slightly. "I love you enough to bet my entire future on the chance that we can build something real together." Noah felt his own tears start to fall. Around them, the ballroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even Richard had gone silent, watching this impossible scene unfold. "Yes," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What?" Lila asked, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "Yes," he said louder, dropping to his knees beside her, taking her face in his hands. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll love you for the rest of my life. Yes, I'll do everything in my power to make sure you never regret this moment." And then he was kissing her, there on the marble floor of the Harrington Ballroom, while 100 scandalized socialites watched in shock. It was the most public, most inappropriate, most perfect first kiss either of them could have imagined. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, the ballroom erupted. Not in applause. Most of the crowd was still too stunned for that, but in chaos. Voices raised in outrage, excitement, confusion. Camera phones flashing as people documented the most scandalous social event of the year. Through it all, Noah and Lila remained on their knees in the center of the storm, holding each other like they were the only 2 people in the world. "So," Noah said against her ear, "what happens now?" Lila pulled back to look at him, her eyes sparkling with tears and laughter and something that looked like freedom. "Now we get out of here before my father has us both arrested for disturbing the peace. And then," she said, standing up and pulling him with her, "we find out what happily ever after looks like when you have to build it yourself. Behind them, Richard Harrington was shouting orders to his security team. Marcus was demanding explanations that no one could give him. The crowd was slowly recovering from their shock, beginning to process the social earthquake they'd just witnessed. But Noah and Lila were already moving toward the ballroom's French doors, toward the gardens beyond, toward a future that was uncertain and probably difficult, but entirely their own. As they reached the doors, Noah paused and looked back at the piano where he'd spent so many hours playing background music for a world that had never really seen him. "Wait," he said. "What?" Lila asked, following his gaze. "There's one more song I need to play." Before she could ask what he meant, he was walking back to the piano, pulling her with him. The crowd fell silent again, watching warily as he sat down at the bench and placed his hands on the keys. The first notes that rang out were soft, tentative, the melody he'd been composing the night before. The song about loving something you couldn't have, about watching something beautiful slip away. But as his fingers found their rhythm, the melody began to change. The sadness was still there, but it was being transformed into something else. Hope, joy, the sweet ache of love found against all odds. He played it all the way through, this new version of his song. When the last note faded away, he looked up to find Lila staring at him with wonder. "What was that?" she whispered. "That," Noah said, standing up and taking her hand one final time, "was our love song." And then, together, they walked out of the ballroom and into the night, leaving behind a crowd of shocked socialites, an enraged father, a humiliated ex-fiancée, and two lives they no longer wanted to live. The golden chandelier still threw shards of light across the grand hall. The Steinway still gleamed like a jewel in the center of the room. But the music that had brought them together had carried them away to something far more precious than anything money could buy. 6 months later, Noah and Lila were married in a small ceremony in Chicago, where Emma, healthy and radiant in her role as maid of honor, played violin while Noah accompanied her on a rented piano. Lila wore a simple white dress from a department store and had never looked more beautiful. Richard Harrington didn't attend. He'd followed through on his threats, cutting Lila off completely and making sure she knew exactly what she'd given up. The social consequences had been brutal. Their story had made headlines in the society pages, inspiring everything from romantic admiration to vicious gossip. But as Noah and Lila stood in that small church, surrounded by Emma and a handful of friends who loved them for who they were rather than what they owned, none of that mattered. They'd found their happily ever after, and it sounded exactly like music. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.